Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. That cuddly guy over there, that's Tim Dennis. Tim.
Yes.
You know, even in this day and age, during the current weirdness of the world, we still have to recognize certain things. Holidays like Christmas, Tim, Easter, Halloween. These are staples of our history. These are things that no matter what belief system you're a part of, everybody's interested. And there's a big holiday coming up in just a few days. Tim, of course, I'm talking about Valentine's Day.
Oh, yeah.
You know, nothing beats the day you showed up dressed in nothing but a diaper and baby angel wings and a Nerf crossbow to shoot me in the heart. Nothing will ever beat that memory.
Well,
I've tried. I've tried drinking it out, drugging it out, hypnosis.
It was supposed to be a positive memory, Dave.
I've even gargled with bleach. I can't get the thought out of my brain. But anyway, I digress. It was a sweet romantic gesture.
But I did shave my back hair that day, Dave.
You did, into just a giant heart with an arrow going through it. That was, first of all, how you did that by yourself.
It was a very long string and a back hair trimmer, Dave.
Good God.
Yeah.
You know what, though? Doing the paranormal show, you know, I think it'd be remiss. You know, we had a great friend of the show who joined us for many years on Valentine's or around Valentine's Day. She was our love psychic, Edie. And she's been gone, what, now, a year or 2 years?
I think almost 2 years now, yeah.
And we hadn't had her on in a long time, mainly because of the switchover. It's just been impossible to take those kind of phone calls and have that kind of connection again. But she was always a favorite spot. And I'm thinking, boy, Valentine's Day coming up. What in God's green earth could we possibly talk about that would still tie into the paranormal? And I called Lucy Liu. I called Kesha. You know, I called many different celebrities who all claimed to have had sex with the spirits, and believe it or not, Tim, they didn't want to come on the show.
Well, you could have lured Kesha with a nice cup of her own urine, but
drink your own pee once, and nobody lets you forget about it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of icky.
You know. Yeah. Any port in a storm, I guess. When you're thirsty, you're thirsty. And at that time, she was drinking so much, it was just probably pure rubbing alcohol anyway, Tim. So it was probably very clean.
Well, I guess, yeah.
Well, you know, growing up, I would hear stories, especially in the Chicagoland area, of these wayward ghosts. The ghost of Resurrection Mary, one of the most famous ghost stories of Chicago. This beautiful young blonde girl who would make her way to the Willowbrook Ballroom and dance the night away with some unsuspecting Romeo. And then she would ask for a ride home and vanish as they passed the gates of Resurrection Cemetery. Well, no, Dave, that story took place in my state. No, Dave, that story took place in our country. You can actually track that story. The Ghost of Resurrection Mary continues to this date in Chicago. But there was this story that just kind of always touched my soul. I'm like, this girl continues to go to dance to find love. And then, you know, as she passes the cemetery, she either gets out of the car and runs through the gates or just simply vanishes. And this has been cited and seen by so many people. You just can't discount it as urban legend. And police have witnessed and seen strange things. You know, then I went to after high school, I went with my best buddy Paul, and we went on a vacation to Arkansas, and we visited a mountain. I think it was called Petite Jean Mountain or Petite Jean Mountain, and it had this weird legend to it. But essentially, it was this love story, unrequited love story of this woman who fell in love with a man, and she sent him the message to meet her there at the specific time and date. And then when he didn't show up, she threw herself from the mountain and ended her life, only to find that the man had been delayed in getting to her because of, I don't know, traffic or, I don't know, wagon wheel fell off. I can't remember the full story, Tim, but he finds her and and sees his lover and throws himself off to be with her for eternity. And now there are nights you can hear the screams of the two lovers as they plummet to their deaths, or you see them hand in hand walking along the side of the road. There are stories of these ghostly love stories. And I thought, that'd be cool. But, nobody I know has ever bothered to put together a book about, like, haunted love stories. But I was wrong, Tim. I was, so wrong. And not just any haunted love stories, Tim. For today's journey, we're going to a magical place, Tim. A place of talking mice and criminals that know no boundaries. Our guest today, Christopher Balzano, is back. It's been about 10 years. He introduced us to the world of puckwudgies, Tim. Puckwudgies. No, those are not the things that fellow hockey players give to each other with their jock straps. They are creatures. Strange, strange little creatures. He is back, though, with a new book, Haunted Florida Love Stories. Tim, finally, some good from the state of Florida we get to hear on today's show.
It's about time.
Yeah, Christopher Balzano, welcome back to the show, sir.
It is really good to be back with you guys. I'm not quite sure if anything I write can redeem the state of Florida, but here I am, and I'm documenting what's going on. So,
you've worked very closely with our good friend Jeff Belanger for years. I know you and I have exchanged pleasantries and messages from time to time over social media and bumped into each other. I'm sorry that we're remiss in having you back on the show, but I'm glad that we're able to connect at this point. I do have to say, puckwudgies, I can't just throw out a title like that and not have you discuss that for listeners who might have missed one of our original episodes. And now you can go back, folks, in case you've forgotten. We actually have many years worth of episodes of Darkness Radio now available on this app. Just scroll back through time, and on some of them they allow you to type in a guest's name or a title or something, and you can go back and do that. But you have to explain, before we go to Haunted Florida Love Stories, just what the F is a puckwudgie?
The funny thing is that it's actually you who coined the phrase of calling me the puckwudgie guy here in the fine state of Florida when we met in St. Pete, and you yelled it at me across the auditorium. And I was like, okay, I'll own that. I'll take that. Yeah, it's crazy. So, I consider myself a folklorist. I consider myself a haunted folklorist. And nothing probably says that better than puckwudgies, because since that first conversation, it'd be interesting to go back and listen to those interviews. Puckwudgies have taken off. They're huge now. They are these little troll type creatures that the word originally kind of comes from Algonquin. It was named or it was brought to my attention through the Wampanoags because people were experiencing these really crazy little trolls, and they'd be in the woods, they would see them, and then all of a sudden they would disappear. But the twist of it was, a few days later, they would appear in their house, and they would be sometimes levitating outside, sometimes just standing in the corner, sometimes on top of them like a old hag syndrome kind of thing. And every person would say, I got the feeling that they were telling me not to go back to the woods, that they knew where I lived, and it was a warning. And all of them were saying this, and they had no word for it. And I found it in Joe Citro's book, Passing Strange. I started doing research, and all of a sudden I realized, like, wow, this is a folklore little monster. It's a gremlin, it's a troll, it's a leprechaun, and yet people in Massachusetts are still seeing it. And the more research I did, I found out that it's something that's being experienced all throughout the country.
Are you finding it in areas where there's higher consumption of Sam Adams beer?
Well, usually there's some kind of alcohol. I think Sam Adams is really for just those Bridgewater Triangle, Massachusetts people.
Yeah.
Although the funny thing is, you laugh, but there's actually now a puckwudgie beer. That's how popular it's become. There's puckwudgie ale.
Unbelievable.
That's okay. My birthday's in a few months if you guys want to get me some. So I've yet to try it myself.
Let me put you down for a case, and we'll have it shipped out to you. So puckwudgies. What do you, being a folklorist,
Mm-hmm.
There's usually a point that kind of connects why the story was important at one point, why these beings might be there, whether it was, we create the legend of the forest monster to keep kids from straying off into the forest and maybe being mauled by real animals, or lake monsters to keep the kids from going out there too deep and getting hurt. There always seems to be behind the folklore more of a parabolistic aspect to it. What do you find behind something like the Pukwudgie?
Well, the first thing is you have to realize that they're real, that people are experiencing them independent. And now, of course, everything you get is kind of tainted because they're popular. But people were experiencing this and telling me descriptions of it before I ever found it in a book. So they're real. But what they are is where the confusion comes in. And that's kind of even the basis of the Haunted Florida Love Stories, is this idea that we experience the paranormal and then we have to put it through a filter, right? We have to put it through something we understand because we don't have that happen to us all the time. And so what happens is bad stuff goes on. You see these little creatures, unexplained things go on. You have to make sense of life somehow. So all of a sudden, these little creatures that you're seeing in the woods, they're there because you did something wrong. You're there because you did something bad. You can't get the Pukwudgies angry. Instead, you have to avoid that part of the forest, and that's the best way. Or you have to make sure that you don't go out in the woods by yourself, because if you go out in the woods by yourself, you're going to be the Pukwudgie's next victim, and then you're going to be the little ghost light, or what they call Taipaiwunkas, that are going to draw other innocent people into the woods to die as well. So I think the experience and what's going on with the Pukwudgies are real. But once again, like you were saying, we put kind of the significance and this motive to their action. No Pukwudgie's ever written the Book of Pukwudgie, right? They've never written down what their rules are and why they're there and what their belief system is. We just feel it's a certain thing because we need it as people to be that way. So you know why the Pukwudgies turned and all this bad stuff happened? Because the gods went away and they killed the gods because the gods were mad because they stole their food. And all these stories are just kind of the human trying to process and make some kind of understanding of things that can't be explained and can't be understood.
You say it with such authority. No, Pukwudgies exist.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, we can say that this place might be haunted, that place might be haunted. We can say, well, that lake monster that you see, maybe it's a this or that. These are independent reports that I initially got from people who described almost the exact same experience, gave a physical description of a creature, which then I was able to find had been talked about for hundreds of years. So I would have to say the 7 people who contacted me before I started publishing about this are all crazy. And not only are they all crazy, they're all suffering from the same delusion. Which makes more sense to you? That there's a troll in the woods, or that 7 people that don't know each other in different counties in these different areas all are experiencing the same thing and are all experiencing the same delusion? It makes more sense that there's a troll in the woods.
I can see both sides of that, right? But then it begins, what is it? Where do these beings come from? Have they always been there? Do we see, through different aspects of history, explanations of these beings?
Yeah, I mean, well, we have leprechauns, right? So these things are essentially the same kind of physical description of fairies and trolls and leprechauns that we see in European countries. We have it in Australia. It's called the Oz spirit. So every culture seems to have some kind of diminutive, mischievous kind of spirit, especially of the woods, ones that kind of take control of the roads. I mean, those kinds of things, as we plow into the woods, all we're doing is pushing them back. So the fact that we don't see them as much anymore probably has much more to do with the fact that they're hiding or they're kind of consolidating themselves and that they don't exist. I mean, these reports just of Pukwudgies and North American ones span back at least 500, 600 years. Then when you start looking at the European ones, it's all throughout their culture, and it was generally accepted that a fairy mound, you don't go near a fairy mound. It's or you stay off or you stay on the path that has cut through the woods, because to go off, you're going to mess with the leprechauns that are there, or you're going to mess with these little trolls and goblins and things like that. So, every culture seems to have something like this.
Well, and I get that to a degree, but, there was also a time when we believed that the world was flat.
Yeah.
There are still people that do believe that the world is flat, Chris. We'll be talking about that on an upcoming episode. Stay tuned.
Well, let me give you so I went to Indiana. Oddly enough, I think I'm the only person in the world who my bucket list was to go to Indiana. And I went to this place called Mounds State Park. And Mounds was one of these locations that was a Pukwudgie hotspot. The only other person I knew who wrote significantly about Pukwudgies was a gentleman from Indiana who said that these were commonplace. These things were seen in this one area of Indiana called Mounds State Park. Joe Citro wrote about him a little bit. Lauren Coleman wrote about him a little bit. But any significant exploration, the only other person was this guy. And so I finally made it out to Mounds State Park, and I happened to be there on a day that they had this amazing woman who had a doctorate in anthropology and Native American studies, and she was telling me that tribes from all across the country would come to Indiana because of the alignment of the moon and the stars, and this was like a sacred burial place where you would take your most sacred. So if there was someone who was really historically significant and you were a Wampanoag, they wouldn't necessarily be buried in New England. They would be brought to this place because this was like the ultimate burial site. And what she said to me was they didn't have a common language, right? They didn't have a way to communicate necessarily. And so therefore, some words would catch on, or they would use, their hands to communicate. And the word Pukwudgie caught on to all these different Native American tribes because all of them had these Pukwudgies, right? So this Algonquin word is ended up being used by tribes in Mississippi, tribes a little bit more to the West Coast, tribes here in Florida, definitely tribes that were in Canada and in the northern part of the United States. The reason why was because they were all experiencing them. So I can say someone told me that the earth was flat, and that kind of makes sense to me because I can't see anything. But to have a whole group of people, once again, who don't know each other, who decide, yeah, I've got little people too. I'll call them Pukwudgies, and that'll kind of be my usable word for it. Makes sense that they were experiencing something. What that something is, we'll never really know.
All right. Well, you're here for a reason. Your new book, Haunted Florida Love Stories. Why decide to write a book like this? I mean, I'm fascinated and glad you did, and we do have a link for it on today's program guide, so it's easy to find. But why ghostly love stories?
So I got out of the paranormal field for a while, and I know that's the only reason I haven't been on the show for a while. And when I came back, I decided I didn't want to be an investigator anymore.
That was the reason, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't want to be an investigator anymore. And the main reason for that was, this gathering of evidence, and what do we do with it after that? Are we trying to make sense of anything paranormal? Or are we just gathering diamonds in the hopes of being rescued? So I left it because I didn't feel like I had a place anymore. And then I decided, you know what? I'm going to get back to what I originally wanted to do, which was to tell stories. And I decided to become a legend tripper instead. So to some people, there's not really a difference in that. But to me, it meant going out to a place that had a haunted history, not necessarily just a ghost story, but there was some kind of backstory. There was something going on there that people in that area were telling the story. And I wanted to look at, is it possibly happening, right? So try to experience it, although that's the smallest part of what I do. But more of, why are the people telling this story? And how does it change like their little town or their little part of a certain town? How are they using this story? And in doing that, I did probably 2 years worth of shows. And we would go out and we would explore it. And we would talk about the sociological aspects of it. We'd go out and try to experience it. Spoilers, I actually experienced more as a legend tripper than I ever did an investigator. And then we started to, between my co-host and I at the time, have a little joke where we would start telling a story or a legend we were going to follow up on. And we would say, hashtag haunted love, yep, another story where love seems to be the backstory. And so the book kind of pushed itself out. I had all these stories before I ever got the contract to write the book, because it's one of those things we can't understand. So if we go back to what I said, right? Like, we try to put it through a filter of understanding when we experience the paranormal. What's more understandable and kind of more readily available than a love story, right? Or a backstory that has something to do with two tragic lovers who, because of misunderstandings, end up dying, right? It's Romeo and Juliet, and even Romeo and Juliet goes further back than that plot. And so, the book made sense because we were already experiencing those kinds of legends.
Fair enough. Well, let's start delving into the world of these ghostly interludes. And what was one of the first stories that kind of caught your attention?
Wow, I think probably the one that really sparked us talking about haunted love would have to be Silver Springs. Not only in that, like, oh wow, that was one of my favorite songs. I love that song, Silver Springs. But there is a park here in Florida. The Creature from the Black Lagoon was shot there. Tarzan, the TV show, was filmed there. It was Disney before Disney. And it's had this kind of ebb and flow, and now especially it's obviously can't be as popular as the things that are around it because it's right near Orlando. But people were telling all of these different ghost stories about it, right? So people were seeing these ghost lights. They were seeing this ghostly canoe, like this kind of see-through transparent canoe that would go over this absolutely beautiful area in Florida, the Silver Springs. And I was like, oh, well, so is it a ghost? I started doing research and I found the same activity had 4 different stories attached to it. And each story was a story of love, right? So the first one that people were being told, and this is published, like this was in the brochure that they handed out to people to get them to come. There were these 2 lovers, and the boy, his father was a landowner, and the woman worked for the father. And they weren't supposed to be together because no son of mine is going to, involve himself with simple trash. You're a high class man. But they fell in love, and they used to go to Silver Springs, and they would kind of seal their hidden love in this one location, which became known as the bridal chamber. Eventually, he asks her to marry him at this bridal chamber. He gives her a bracelet and says, "I don't have a ring right now. This is my mom's bracelet. It's a family heirloom. It's my commitment to you that I'm going to marry you." The father finds out. He sends him to Europe. The woman becomes so distressed by him being away that she won't eat. She's not sleeping. She slowly deteriorates, and she decides that she's just going to end it all. So she takes a boat out to where the bridal chamber is. She weighs herself down and she jumps into the water. And it's said that the ground itself underneath the water opened up and kind of sucked her in, which is why her body was never found. Well, over in Europe, he was completely lovesick. He goes back home. The first thing he does is just try to find where the woman he loves is, and he's told that she has committed suicide. He sails out to the same exact location. He jumps from the boat into the water. Once again, the ground opens up. A hand with a bracelet comes out, grabs his in a tender embrace, and they're both never seen again. And that boat that you see, that ghostly boat that you see, is them making the journey back and forth to the location. And the ghost lights are their souls still kind of lost in that area. Well, that story has almost it's almost the exact same story, only it's 2 Native Americans. But that's not the end of the story, because some people say it was 2 lovers who escaped. So these 2 got away, but they were being followed by the father's tribe, and they wanted to essentially escape that. So they jumped from the cliff into the waters of Silver Springs, and that's where the boat comes from, and that's where the lights come from. Of course, I've been to Silver Springs 3 times. Like much of Florida, there's no cliff there, right? If we're in Florida, it's flat. And yet the story persists. And so I was amazed at, wait a minute, like there are all these different stories going back generations. They all have the same paranormal experience. They all have these ghost lights across the water. They all have this weird fog that rolls in. They all have this canoe that appears and disappears at will. And yet they found different reasons and different backstories to kind of explain what was going on. The interesting thing is, the very first time I went to Silver Springs, I went and I asked all the old people, right? All the old people that were working there, older people, I should say, some of the older captains, if they knew the story and they knew it. I asked all the younger ones, and none of them knew anything about it. They had never heard those stories before. But every single employee I talked to, right, there were at least a dozen. All of them had their own ghost story. They're like, yeah, this place is completely haunted. But the older generation, to explain it, made up these great stories that talk about love.
Very cool. See, it is. So there's a lot of it's just parabolistic aspects. But now, how often are things actually cited that just make no sense and seem only to lend themselves more to the haunted history?
I think every story lends itself to the haunted history, right? I think that there are very few, even if you talk about something like a murder happens, right? Like someone commits a murder someplace. We don't know that that's what makes a ghost stay around. We think it does, right? We think if two people are in a fight and one kills the other one and then a ghost is seen, we assume it's the ghost of the person who died. Like they have some kind of unsolved business, right? Or unresolved business. They've got some reason that keeps them here. That's folklore. And yet we believe it. Even investigators and people who look into the science stuff will still fall back on that stuff. So I would say that every single ghost that Tripping on Legends, which is my podcast, my radio show, every single one we've looked into has had this kind of backstory or legend or myth or probably closer to folklore associated with it, which is what appeals to me. If it's just a haunting, if it's just, I posted something recently, I think it was today, about a Waffle House where people have died and so there's a ghost there. Well, to me, that doesn't really kind of a reek of folklore, right? That seems pretty clear cut. First of all, every single Waffle House in Florida has had some kind of shooting and is said to be haunted. But that doesn't appeal to me. So I think that there are hauntings out there.
Wait, are you trying to tell me Waffle Houses in the middle of the night might not be the safest places to visit?
I think, and I think that goes up much more when you're in Florida. So just take your typical Waffle House experience and amp it up, and then you have, ones in Ocala and Lakeland and places like that. Not to call any place in particular weird.
Too late. You put it out there, Balzano.
I know.
Yeah. I had a story told to me, I want to say probably about 3 or 4 years ago from when I was at the Michigan Paracon. One of the listeners came up to tell me, and I apologize, I can't remember your name, and I know I'll get some of the specifics incorrect, but she had just said, she goes, do you believe that people know before they're going to die, especially if it's unexpected? And I said, from my understanding, there have been people that seem to get this sense that their time is coming to an end, even though they don't have cancer, no debilitating disease, they're not suicidal, there's nothing along those lines. And I said, why do you ask? She said, well, a few years ago, she goes, my boyfriend got up and was very affectionate that morning and just kept telling me, you have to know how much I love you. I love you, and I would never go away from you. And she's like, yeah, I get that. And he was just like all day messages, texts, calls. And then on the way home that night, he's killed in a car accident. And a few days later was Valentine's Day. And as she's, just buried her boyfriend, is dealing with this loss, she gets a flower delivery. And at first thinks, oh, well, maybe her boyfriend's family sent her flowers, but it came from him. And the card said, I'm sorry I can't be here with you. I don't know how to explain it. I just knew my time was up, but I'll always love you. Mm-hmm. And then signed the card. And that to me was one of the sweetest and most heartbreaking paranormal stories I'd ever heard, where it comes to reaching out, actually being on this side and knowing your time is coming and doing something proactive about it. But, in that sense, well, I'll ask both you and Tim, what would you do if you couldn't put your finger on it, but you had a sense your end was near for no particular reason whatsoever? It's not like you've been sick. It's not like you've got some irreversible disease, but you just woke up today and knew, I don't have long. What would you do at that time?
I think I would do something very similar, although I probably wouldn't have the money to send flowers because that's really expensive. But the basic idea of that, which is, if you had a day left and you had that sense, everyone thinks that they would be like, well, I'm just going to party. I'm just going to I'm going to go and kill somebody that I've always wanted. But in all honesty, you would make sure that the people that you love were safe and that they knew you loved them, right? I mean, that's the biggest regret that the living have, right? I wish I had known that today was the last day I was going to see them. I would have told them how much I love them. I think I would spend my day making sure that those who I love knew it and knew it for sure. And that's kind of that powerful, probably the most popular and common crisis apparitions are, a crisis apparition is not you just randomly see a ghost. It's someone comes back to tell you that they are okay, or that they've passed, or that they still love you. And so I really honestly think that the way that love motivates us in the afterlife too.
I think I have to agree with Christopher and maybe expound on the point a little bit. I think in a way, a lot of us do get a little bit of a hint that we're about to go. Something happens. There's a little internal trigger in our bodies, and we do drop little hints to people that we love, but we don't want to alarm them. I mean, if you know you're about to go, do you really want to scare somebody? Do you really want to frighten them to the point where they freak out? You don't want somebody to freak out if you know you're going to go. You're already freaked out. I think to expound on what Chris is saying, I think, I would let the people around me know how much I truly care about them and love them, and let them know truly how I feel about them. I may even let a few people know how much I really don't like them on the way out, just to get it all out. But in that moment, I think just kind of, pay all debts, clear all boards, and get it all out. And in that point, be satisfied that with everything I have to get out before I go, and then, clear all slates and leave the way I need to leave. And at that point, be satisfied with what I have to do. And in that, nobody can say, well, I never knew how he felt about this, or I never knew how he felt about that. You know how I feel,
Yeah, boys. Yeah, that one thing about me though, guys, is I am such a hypochondriac. I wake up at least 3 times a month thinking, oh shit, this is it. I'm done. I'm done.
That's a lot of flowers sent.
Yeah, I couldn't keep up with it. It's just one of those things. Well, I had a weird non-heart attack a number of years ago. Now every time I've got the slightest twinge in my chest, it sends panic waves through me. My poor wife has had to deal with me in so many different ways. I give her credit for it. I've told the story, but I'll mention it to you, Chris. One night my daughter has diabetes, and her alarm goes off if it's out of range, so we have to get up and check on her. And I woke up and I just had that nasty sleeping too long, pretty sure one of the cats pooped in my mouth flavor, right? And I'm like, blah, 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 I wish I had some gum. And I open up my eyes and I look, and there's 2 chiclets on the floor. So I just grab them, throw them in my mouth, give them a quick blow off, and throw them in my mouth, start chewing them. And I go in to check on my daughter, and oh my God, my mouth, what did I eat or drink before bed? Because the gum isn't even helping. It almost tastes worse, like metal. Ugh, what is wrong? And I'm talking to my daughter, and she's kind of nervous, and I'm talking her down, and all of a sudden I start sweating, and I just I'm gonna check out. I'm like, something's wrong. I go, I'll be right back. You take care of yourself. I'm going to go to the bathroom. So I go in the bathroom, stumble down the hall, and I sit down, and I'm pouring sweat, just pouring. And my heart, you could see my shirt just thumping. And I'm like, oh, God, this is it. I'm done. I walk in. Are you okay, honey? She's like, yeah. I go, okay, I'm going to go back to bed. And I go lay down next to my wife for about 5 minutes, and it's not getting better. Right. And I'm chewing the gum because I'm hoping, at least I'm going to get some fresh breath before I'm going to have to kiss my wife goodbye here in a moment. So I finally, I shake her awake and I'm like, honey, go get the kids. I'm not going to make it. And she's like, what? And I said, I think I'm having a massive heart attack. Go get the kids. I'll call 911. I said, no, I don't think this is going to matter. Just go get the kids. I knew, Chris, this was it. This was the end. She goes, why? What happened? And I told her step by step everything I just told you. And she goes, you found gum on the floor? And I'm like, yeah. And I go, that's the part you're focused on? I'm sweating. I'm about to have a massive heart attack. And she goes, dumbass, that was my Nicorette gum you just took too. That's like a pack of smokes you're chewing. I'm like, what? She goes, spit out the gum. She gets me some water. I rinse out my mouth, take a couple sips. Hey, about a half an hour later, everything comes back down. But this poor woman is had to deal with that kind of tragedy. So if I was buying flowers every time I thought I was going to check out, or calling Tim to curse him out on my way out the door, oh man, this poor guy's phone would be ringing constantly. No, I kid, but it's funny. I don't know what would you do? I've had those moments where I'm like, boy, what if this is it? I'm something weird feeling. But like I said, I'm such a hypochondriac. I don't ever do anything about it. I take that back. Once, probably 10 years ago, I woke up feeling really off. Like, I don't know, like I was high and disassociating with my body. And I went into the bathroom with my phone and making a video diary saying goodbye to everybody. Just, asking forgiveness, sending love, telling all these stories. And then I just say, and I'm sorry, this is the way I got to tell it, where I'm standing there shirtless in the bathroom mirror. telling me.
I am so glad I've never gotten that video.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. It's a good video.
Okay, please. It's interesting because, before, actually, I think the last time I was on the show was to promote haunted objects. And that's a book that Tim Weisberg and I, we put a lot of work into doing this research and doing these stories, and then we put it out there. And recently we're like, okay, we've gotten so many other stories from that. We need to do a follow-up. And as I started going through some of the stories I'd collected in those 10 years, I realized that I had 3 of them that involve people who bought presents right before they died. And all 3 of the cases are stories of people who they weren't necessarily like known for giving presents. One of them that really comes to mind is of a uncle who was always forgetting his nephew's birthday. And he was always, the last one of the party. Oh, I forgot the party was today. And he had bought him a gift, something that was connected. It was a toy car that was connected to both of them. And he bought it ahead of time. And he actually died on his way back from work to get the present to bring it to the house, and called. So this woman had it on her answering machine. Her brother saying, hey, listen, I'm sorry I can't make it to the party. Something's come up. Can you just make sure he gets the presents in the closet? But she got the message 3 days after he had died. That kind of story comes up all the time. And then what ends up happening is the item that they bought ends up becoming either a bond or it becomes haunted, right? It's somehow you can connect to that person who's dead because of that item that they bought them.
Creepy stuff. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We've got more to discuss with our guest, Chris Balzano, right here on Darkness Radio. Welcome back. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis, our guest today, Chris Balzano. His book, Haunted Florida Love Stories, Ghostly Tales of Love. Let's get into a couple more of your favorite stories from the book. What are some of the other ghostly love tales that we have yet to discover?
I recently did an episode of my show called The Cases That Haunt Me. And these were legend trips and ghostly folklore that even sometimes years later, I don't think they've reached their resolution, right? There's something about them that just stays with me that I feel like I've got to kind of close the book on it, or it doesn't have a conclusion. Probably the best example of this is the case Minnesota, which is essentially in Tampa. It's an old abandoned war. I shouldn't even say war. I never saw war. But it was a fort that was basically created and built to reinforce another fort kind of in Tampa Bay, which made it inconsequential. Nothing important ever happened there. It never fired its guns in any kind of battle, only as practice. But I had heard this story of a flirtatious, ghostly fisherman. So there was this guy, and a lot of people feel his name is Dalton Gray, who was a local there. He worked at a kind of a bait shop that was on the pier, and he was known as a womanizer. This ghost started to appear after Dalton was killed, and it would just be fishing in the water, right? Just kind of like casting out a line. And only would people see this ghost if there was a girl nearby, right? And then he would literally go over and start talking to the girl. And all the girls were like, he was good looking. He had a good body. Like we just decided to flirt. We flirted for a little bit. And then she would look back and he would be gone. And his reel would be gone. His rod and reel would be gone. He would just disappear into thin air. And then they would ask someone and they'd say, ask for a description. They go, oh, yep, that's Dalton. That's Dalton. And I thought, what a great legend. What we're going to do is my co-host at the time was a beautiful woman. We're going to go and we're going to get you hooked up, right? We tried to get Tinder as a sponsor to promote the episode. We actually made like fake dating profiles and put those up. Unfortunately, now my students find those on social media, and it looks like we're trying to do some kind of weird threesome. But if you know the show, it's all references to episodes. We went out there and we tried to get her a ghostly date. He didn't show up. Nothing happened, unfortunately. But there was another love story that was coming out of Fort DeSoto. Because this armament was essentially useless, little by little, people stopped like putting a whole bunch of troops there. So it went from like 500 troops to 300 troops to 200 troops. They had all these buildings. They had this perfect encampment. What they decided to do was make it the quarantine leading to Tampa, right? So anyone who was going into Tampa, any immigrant who was coming into Tampa would have to report. And if they were thought to be sick in any way, shape, or form, they were sent off to Fort DeSoto. Well, that then expanded to being a yellow fever quarantine. So at that time, there's only maybe 10, 20 troops, and the rest of the place is doctors and sick people, right? And so there were these 10 buildings, and depending on how sick you were in one of these 10 buildings. And if you got sicker, you went from building 1 to building 3 to building 5 until finally you passed away. And if you were poor, you were buried on the property. And if you weren't, then you were shipped off to wherever you had come from. One of the stories that had come out was of this woman who's seen near what is known as the hospital. So and the foundations are still there, and only the foundations. Walking between the beach, which is maybe 20 yards away, walking around this foundation. She's said to be in this long dress, which kind of looks old-fashioned, crying. Sometimes she's crying so loud that it's almost a moan. And the story is that she had 5 kids, and all of them were in different buildings from where she was. And the worst 3 ended up in the most critical building and all died without her. She ended up committing suicide, and she cannot find peace. So she continues to walk this one little area in Fort DeSoto looking for the children that she wasn't able to comfort as they were dying. And it's the exact opposite, right? Because on one hand, you have this really kind of fun, flirtatious fisherman. Let's see if we can get hooked up. We get there and we realize that the story is a lot sadder. When I go out in the field, I don't bring EMF. I don't bring something to detect changes in temperature. We bring cameras to film and to kind of bring people into our world of what this experience is, and we audio tape everything. The girl I was working with, her name's Natalie. All she was doing was walking around the foundation, and she has no experience except for what we've done on legend tripping. She had no paranormal knowledge kind of going into working with me. She just, she has a little bit of empathy going on. She's an empath. But her EVP sessions are literally just her talking, her having a conversation. And she's walking around this foundation and she says, "I'm a mother. It really sucks. I know. I know what you're feeling." Our rule in Tripping on Legends is it ain't evidence if we don't hear it plugged into the stereo on the car ride home, right? Like, we don't go searching for EVPs.
Right.
Clear as day, as we're driving home, Natalie says, "It sucks. I know. I'm a mother. I know what you feel." And on the tape, it's just a soft voice that says, No, you don't."
Wow.
Basically, that's one of the reasons why Natalie left the show, because it goes from being this kind of interest and even, intrigue and maybe liking being scared a little bit, to realizing that at that spot there was so much grief that someone was actually able to communicate it to you. And it went from just being theoretical for her to, honest to God, there was someone there who reached out to you, and they're so sad. They love their children so much that their spirit still remains. And that was a little too intense.
There's an instance, right, where you get a response nobody expected. Mm-hmm. So that's always kind of one of those boundary breakers for me, because, again, when I ghost hunt and paranormal investigate a location, we go in with some preconceived notions and ideas. We try to communicate in any way we can, and we kind of come in with a belief of what we might come into contact with. That is so much more impactful than just yeses, nos, and get out, right? Yes. That was not an answer any of you expected to hear come back. That tells me there is something intelligent there.
And when I hear it, and it's been 2.5 years, when I hear it, even when I tell the story, I still get those goosebumps, because it's so genuine and it's so, I'm not going to say unable to be faked, but so real from whatever was talking with us, and it was interesting because it's, what do you do with that? Right. Because, I'm not a psychic at all. I don't think of myself as any kind of healer, but in a way, like, she was reaching out to us, which is part of the reason why it still haunts me, right? Part of the reason why it stays with me years later. And I recently went there probably about a month ago with my kids. And all I did was, because I do Tripping on Legends with kids, which I used it to teach them history. I use it to teach them how to interview people, things like that. And with the ghost stories are kind of their inspiration to actually get out there and do stuff, right? And I had the kids try to communicate with her and just basically say, "Hey, like, we're kids. We understand that you love them. It's time to move on." I don't know if it worked. I've yet to go over like some of the tapes of the time there. But, there was this moment, and it might have just been me healing myself, being like, "Oh, wow, this air feels very different right now. The moment is over. It's time for us to go." I think maybe we might have helped her somehow, but who knows?
Very cool. Very cool. I know this is in Florida, but we don't want to give away every story from your book. So kind of filling in on the show as well. When my mom was passing in Illinois at the hospice care center, I talked to the hospice care workers. I don't want to call them nurses because I know they're more than that. Not that nurses are lower, but they did a lot more. They were full-on caretakers. I asked him, I said, I do the paranormal. Oh, yeah, I know your mom told us. And I said, do you guys ever have experiences? And they all kind of looked at each other and laughed. And they're like, yeah. From, they'll be sitting at their desk and they see one of the patients come walking down the hall, and they'll look at each other and then pick up the call and pick up the phone and call the doctor and say, we've lost one. Come on down. Well, how do you know? Because he just walked past me in the hall. And the doctor just comes. He understands. The spirit is up wandering. The body is there. They said, but one of the sweetest stories, the guy, I believe his name was Chris, was telling me this. He was the nurse and provider for my mom. He said one of his favorite moments was he was in the room, and they're like little efficiency apartments, and he was loading some stuff into the refrigerator and hanging up some of the clothing for one of the patients, and he heard the patient talking to somebody, and this guy was almost giggly the way he was talking, and Chris looked around the corner, and this guy's he's got his hand up and out, palm down, and it looks like he's holding hands with somebody. And he walks around the corner and he goes, hey, who are you talking with? And the guy, without breaking visual connection from whoever he's speaking to, and he said, a friend. And he goes, oh, well, that's great. What does your friend have to say? And he goes, he breaks the view, looks at him and goes, I'll tell you, but you can't tell my wife. And the guy goes, okay. And he goes, this is the first love of my life. We were so in love. We were going to be married, and she died when she was 18 years old. And she's been waiting for me this whole time. And she's here holding my hand. This is so wonderful. And Chris said, oh, and you don't think I should tell your wife? And the guy looks at it and goes, no, because I've told my wife she's the love of my life since I met her. And that'll always be true. But this was the first love of my life, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. And he was gone the next day. And he said it was just one of the most heartwarming, sweet things that he said, if you've ever questioned, are we alone in those last moments? He doesn't believe it. And he said, and it's amazing to him who shows up to spend some time. So here, this unrequited love from his past 50, 60 years ago, who passed too early, has waited all this time and came to be the first one there to sit on his bed and hold his hand as he was ready to make that transition. And I just thought to myself, how beautiful is that his wife, the love of his life, was there with him at the moment he passed, and so was his first love. Yeah. And that was kind of a beautiful little cyclical moment.
Yeah, and then you hear that story, right? And it makes complete sense, and it moves the heart, and it feels entirely genuine. And you wish that you could have it. And that's kind of what informs our folklore too, right? Like you hear a story that is real, right? Or that feels real. And so when you hear those other stories about that same kind of thing happening on a bridge in Sarasota or in Minnesota, it makes sense to you because you've heard those kinds of stories from hospice care workers or from hospitals or from your grandmother who told the story about when it happened to her mom and her dad. And it makes you, it's easy to be scared. It's one of the funny things, Dave, is that people look at my books sometimes. Haunted Objects was an excellent example of this, but I've even gotten it from Haunted Florida Love Stories. Is this like, it's not scary enough. And I'm like, dude, don't you realize like sometimes ghost stories aren't scary. Sometimes they're uplifting. Right. And sometimes the creepy factor is that it happens to you or you're experiencing it and it's not supposed to happen, but not the subject matter. Who wouldn't want to reunite with someone that they love? Who wouldn't want to, the idea, if you take that Fort DeSoto story, the idea that a mother's love is so strong that it exists even after she dies, that's really comforting. The scary thing is being there in that moment and seeing her appear, right? or hearing her voice when you're not actually physically there. So, but oftentimes ghost stories are not about how scared they make you.
With that said, though, my plan has always been that if I go before Tim, when he's finally laying there on his deathbed, I'm going to appear to him screaming, saying, "Don't come! It's horrible! It's horrible!" And then fade back into the wall. Just, I just think that would be the best way for him to.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I really wonder, what kind of ghost I would be and who I would spend time with. And I really think I would just totally mess with my kids. And that's kind of my fatherly love existing after death would be is I would just totally mess with my kids. I would move their stuff. I would whisper into their ears, I can see you, right? Just so that they never did anything creepy or weird. You know what I'm talking about? Right. That's the kind of ghost I think I would be. That would be my haunted love.
I would say that to me would be my hallmark. If we're given that opportunity to stay here and I could move on a little later, I would totally stay and screw with everybody I know. Everybody. I keep moving the Ouija board from behind the glass on the mantle and put it out on the kitchen table, right? And just keep making it appear in different parts of the house to freak out everybody. And be that one pushing it to who's going to be the next to die, push the planchette to the house cat or something, so that just freaks out the room full of kids. But that's my twisted sense of humor.
I would add to that I would want to be a little bit of a jerk too. So I would be the one setting off the fire alarm. In addition to that too.
So at 4 a.m, you got the whoop.
Exactly. Not only am I messing with you, but you're going to have to get up in the middle of the night.
God, I wonder if that's just adding on to your karma for when you do finally cross through that door.
You had to say that, huh? You had to kind of jinx me on it.
Yeah, Thanks. Here's the thing to consider. What if, Father Guido said, every day we're paid $1 for being alive, and for every horrible thing we do, everything has a price. And what if, had you just gone through that door, you still had 15 cents in your pocket and you're able to enter the pearly gates, but those last two jokes, now you're negative 8 cents in your account. Chris.
Right.
You don't know how it's going to play out. Let's go back into some more Florida haunted love stories. What else have you got for us?
This one, for us at least, took place right around Valentine's Day. So we had done an episode that I think we actually were able to air 2 years ago on Valentine's Day that had to do with the story of Lorida, Florida. So it's not a misspelling. I actually had someone say, you misspelled Florida in one chapter. I'm like, no, it's called Lorida with a capital L, Lorida, Florida, which is this small place. I could tell you the towns that are around it, and that wouldn't even help you. Are
they towns like Sarasota, and some drunk guy was naming them? What are we going to name this? Let's just call it Lorida, Florida.
The only name that might be better than Lorida, Florida is actually Pasofsky or Pasofaki. I can't remember how it's pronounced. Which is the lake that Lorida, Florida was built on, which in Seminole means place where people die. So as a general rule, if you're going to build a settlement, don't build it on the lake where people die. That's probably bad news. So we heard this story of a man who is desperate to fall in love. So he commissions a love potion from a woman who is thought to be kind of like the town witch. They meet on Arbuckle Creek, the bridge over Arbuckle Creek, by the light of the full moon. And she's going to give him the love potion, and he hears the final price, which is your firstborn child. He completely flips out. He's been waiting on this love potion. He gets into an argument, gets to a physical fight with the old woman, throws her off the bridge where she impales on a tree in the swampy Arbuckle Creek. He immediately realizes that things have gone wrong. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Goes out, weighs her body down, and then leaves Florida altogether. Well, her body won't stay at rest. It floats to the top almost immediately. The people in the town kind of, pick her out of the water. They bury her. It's one of those weird situations where it's like the word witch is never used, right? It's always the old woman, the herbalist, all these kind of weird words, but never actually a witch because they couldn't admit they were doing it. So they didn't want to give her like kind of attention. So they just kind of gave her a kind of a cheap little burial. Almost instantly, her body or this woman starts to appear on the bridge. So people are driving over the bridge at night, and it's a typical ghost roadside legend, right? They drive through her. They think they've hit her sometimes. Sometimes she appears in the car. And they realize that it's the witch, right? This witch that they hastily buried. They've got to give her a proper Christian burial, even though she wasn't Christian. And so they dig her up. They move her over to the next county, and they bury her in a nice ceremony. But the witch still exists. She's still appearing on the bridge, especially by the light of the full moon. It could almost a certainty that you're going to see her on the bridge, till finally they decide, like, you know what? You know what it is? Her house is still here, right? God is punishing us. She keeps coming back because we were not faithful Christians. We need to burn her house down, because when witches and ghosts appear, you're supposed to burn their house down. That gets rid of them. So they went and they found where she lived, and they burned that house to the ground. And I was actually able to find a newspaper article that talked about the house being burnt down. We thought this was the perfect story to do around Valentine's Day, right? So the show leading into it, not only do we get into the legend and kind of some other things that are connected to it, but we did a litany of really bad love potions that you can make. I'm not sure, Dave, if you've ever researched love potions, but they usually involve rubbing something that you don't really want to rub on some place that really shouldn't be rubbed, and making someone else eat it.
Oh my God. Okay.
Even if you're not into ghosts, even if you're just into kind of like folklore, it's a great episode because it's essentially me trying to make Natalie as disgusted as I can about how to make a love potion. But then we were coming up to a full moon, right? We actually ended up missing the full moon, but we were coming up to it. And I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to brew a love potion. We're going to go to the bridge. We're going to see if we can get this woman to talk to us. So leading into it, I started doing more research, and I discovered other people, right? Like sometimes on these sites, and sometimes if people are reporting things, you have to go into the comments. Sometimes really good stuff is in the comments, and it's even better if you can follow up on it. People had been reporting for years at the same location, right? They're still talking about there's the witch on the bridge. They see her. People have been reporting, oh, that's stupid. I've never seen a woman there. I've never seen by the light of the full moon, that's crap. But you know what? Like, I go fishing there all the time, and something plays with my fishing line. And then I look, and there's like a little kid that like darts under the bridge. And this is absolutely stupid. This is ridiculous. This is just an old folklore. But you know what? I see a man, like a middle-aged man, and a little kid at that bridge all the time, and they disappear. I started to think, like, I think the man is paying the price, right? I think he did have to give his firstborn child, and for some reason, they're still stuck at the bridge, right? Because he took the love potion, so he found himself a honey, So I decided to brew this love potion to see if I could communicate with this guy, to see if we could talk to the witch. And leading into it, I contacted Marla Brooks. I'm not sure if you've had Marla Brooks on the show or not.
Sure, right.
But she's my go-to witch. She's my favorite witch in the world. And so she gave me a great love potion recipe along with a protection spell, because she said I would need that. And I decided to brew this up. And it consisted of apples and wine and some other things. And what Marla told me was that once you got these ingredients together, you put it on low heat and you stir for 5 hours chanting this specific thing. I don't know about you. I don't have 5 hours to be chanting. So instead, I did the next best thing. I put it on heat a little bit higher, let it kind of settle, and just asked Alexa to play love songs from the 80s, from 80s metal bands. So every once in a while, I would check in. Bon Jovi would be on and be like, okay, we're good. I would go back to my room. I'd come out. It would be Journey. I'm like, all right, we got this. It's good. Like, I don't think the love potion worked, because that co-host was my girlfriend at the time, and she broke up about a week later. So I don't know if that was effective, but I do know that we went to that bridge. We drank that love potion. We dumped a little onto the dock. We dropped a little bit onto the bridge itself, over the bridge into the water, kind of like giving up a little to our homies. And I saw the man and his kid that night. We were able to, it's, once again, it's like, it's not about evidence, about experience. So I have nothing to give you, right? I have nothing to show you. But I'm on that bridge after we had dumped it from the bridge into the water. And I literally just saw two figures as if they were like a negative of a photograph, but it's nighttime, right? And they went kind of away from me, then almost instantaneously parallel with me, and then away the other way off the bridge. And I saw this 3 times. And we were shining lights in my eyes to figure out if, there's some weird trick of light. Did we put the flashlight in my eyes and I'm seeing like little trails? I can't experience it, but we knew instantaneously we had experienced something and the time was gone and it was time for us to leave. So, it's one of those things that's a really great story. It's kind of caught on and people are now going to that bridge with love potions, trying to see if they can see the witch now themselves. So I'm glad I kind of sparked that. But it's a great story. And, I won't get into it too much, but it really parallels the history of this Lord of Florida, which is now in and of itself a ghost town.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, Chris, so a week later, you and this girlfriend break up. Was it an amicable break at that point?
Yeah, definitely. She continued on the show for about 3 months after that. Yeah.
And did you end up both finding somebody that you fell madly in love with afterwards?
No, I'm still pining over her myself 2 years later. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sorry.
Wow, that's hurtful. I don't know. I just checked out her profile on Tinder, so I don't think she's got one either. But what are you gonna do?
Right, but the kicker is that you did this love potion. Maybe what it did was uncouple you from each other to find the person.
Yeah. Dave, that's so much more optimistic than I'm used to from you.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I just maybe there's that option.
Months earlier we had gone to Silver Springs, which I had talked about earlier. And one of the legends in Silver Springs is that there are these white flowers which are said to be, she used to pick them and put them in his hair as kind of an affectionate thing. And if you I don't even know how this legend came about, but if you took one and you put it in your left shoe, the person that you're with will be with you forever. And if you pluck it out and you put one in both shoes, you'll almost instantly break up with them, or they'll instantly break up with you. They will stop being attracted to you, and it's a way to get rid of them. Well, Natalie and I did both the left shoe, and then we tried the right, both shoes at different times during the day. So I don't know what that says, whether we were trying to get rid of each other and find each other again. But love finds a way to kind of make itself into every kind of folklore. So
maybe go and reverse that love potion and maybe you'll find each other again.
Yeah. Okay. So don't tell her I said this.
Yeah. Because just let me throw this out there, because you were trying to create a love potion for something that already existed. Maybe that taxed it. Maybe that took away the special nature that you felt that it's not perfect enough. And maybe that was enough to make you both question it. And maybe by letting that go or dissolving that, you could find your way again.
So, Jackie Barrett, you've had her on the show too, I believe. Jackie,
right.
When I want goodness, I go to Marla. When I want kind of the wicked side, I go to Jackie. So they're kind of like the devil and the angel on my shoulder. And Jackie created another love potion for me. She's like, here's the perfect potion to get you guys back together. This was probably like a year later. And she said, you do this, you do that. And she's like, and then you have to go to a body of water that means something to you, right? But all this makes sense. Like when you're in the moment, these kinds of things of like, the folklore of love makes sense. She said, then you have to go find a body of water that means something to you. Didn't I go back to Arbuckle Creek with Jackie's spell and cast it into the water? So I'll let your audience kind of know if anything comes from it, but it's been about a year.
Well, slow. Maybe you misunderstood the find a body of water that means something to you. Maybe your toilet is the best thing.
That actually makes complete sense. So I think I'm going to go find the spell that I cast into Arbuckle Creek and bring it back and flush it. So
flush it, right? That's the water that's closest to you and certainly means something to you. Yeah, it's funny how interpretation is so much the important factor towards what we all do. Well, I'm sorry, buddy, and I do hope that you find the love. If it's not with her, I hope you find it with the person that's meant to fill that void.
It's interesting because her and I are both Italian. And we had made a lot of jokes about these love potions, right? And these love superstitions, which might be a really good follow-up book, right? And then I remembered, wait a minute, there's a tradition with my family that if you love somebody, what you do is when you're making the pasta, because you got to make the pasta by hand, you make sure that you wipe your tears on it, and then whoever eats it is guaranteed never to make you cry again. Right. And my grandparents especially wholeheartedly believe that. Right. They lived by that. My grandmother used to do it all the time, and they were married for 60 years. So it's funny, we kind of laugh some of these things off, the idea of a love potion, but it's in a lot of different traditions. You see how I avoided you saying that I might find her again and told another folktale?
It's fine. I like it. Do you call that meal spaghetti? Little crying. And a mental note, do not eat spaghetti with the Balzano family. I'm sorry. I just don't want you rubbing any bodily fluids on my noodles.
That's okay. I guarantee you I will rub nothing for you, Dave.
Leave my noodle alone, would you?
And not to mention the fact that I would never make homemade pasta for someone who calls them noodles. So...
How dare you, sir? I'll have you know that I may not be a wealthy man, but I've had a private chef for years who takes care of my pasta. You might recognize him, Chef Boyardee.
I love Chef Boyardee, so I can't even say anything about it.
There you go. So in your face. All right. Let's go. We don't have a whole lot of time left here, but let's go out with two more of your favorite ghosty love stories.
Wow. Probably one of my favorites is the story of Stetson University and Hully Tower. And I was originally drawn to this story by another writer. She had written about all the ghostly legends of Volusia County, Florida. And I'd been drawn to that area because it's actually the book that I'm working on right now, because of the Ocala National Forest and all these weird things that happen there. And so it was a great story of this Hully Tower. And the story goes that there was a woman, one of the first class of women to be allowed at the turn of the century. It was 1894. And she went to Stetson, and she absolutely fell in love with her English teacher, her English professor, which is good for me because I teach English. So there's always that, although I wouldn't want my students to fall in love with me. They had a torrid love affair, and they would always meet at this one area of Stetson where Hully Tower is, to make out, right? To kiss a little bit, get a little smooches in. It lasted an entire year. When they came back for the fall semester, they were kind of nervous. I think they're going to catch us or something. It ended up after a football game that they were seen, right? And they were seen by someone in the administration. And before the end of the next day, he was fired. She was thrown out of the school. And there's a picture of him in the book, and it very clearly says, here's the guy. He was thrown out of the school after this. And she was told to go to her room and collect her stuff. And so she went with a security guard. She got all of her stuff. She took this ribbon that he used to put in her hair. He took a love poem. She took a love poem that he had written her. At some point, she escaped her security guard. She escaped this guy, went to the top of Hully Tower, recited her name and said, I will always love, blah, 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 recited his name and jumped from the tower, killing herself. And it said that in the fall, you can still hear a voice screaming out this professor's name, and then you see a ghostly figure falling from Hully Tower and disappearing before she reaches the ground. Amazing story, and totally not true. There is no element of that story that's true, because Hully Tower was not built until 30 years later, right? So, and that
nobody
picture,
got time for logic here, my friend.
That picture of the person of the disgraced English teacher The person in that picture actually went on to become the president of the college. And Hully Tower is only about 20 feet high now. And it's been that way for about the last 20 years because it was destroyed by a hurricane. But the weird thing is that Hully Tower is still extremely haunted, and it's actually haunted by the Hullys. So here's where the real good love story. So that's one of those stories you hear and you're like, oh, that makes sense to me. I've heard that story before. Two people who can't be together. This one's even more beautiful. Hully, the man whose name is escaping me right now, built the tower as a tribute to his wife. His wife loved bells, and he was one of the founders of the college, and he wanted a tower so they could play bells throughout the entire campus for her. And it ended up he died about a week before it was finished. So he never even got to see the bells make their way to the tower. She ends up dying 30 years after him, but they absolutely were in love with each other. They're buried at the base of Hully Tower. So if you look through the little window, you can see like their little caskets at the bottom of it. It's like a little mausoleum to them. Their ghost is said to be seen on the campus, right? They're seen in the early morning hours walking hand in hand. Sometimes they have a dog with them, and they're just kind of like holding hands, looking at each other, and then they disappear. The bells that were in that tower, when they took the tower down, they moved the bells throughout the college, and everywhere that those bells are has a ghost story attached to it. And it was funny because people were telling me the story, and we went to Stetson, and I said, "Oh, those are the bells, right?" And like, "Yeah, yep, that's one of the bells." I'm like, there's a ghost story about this little area too, right? So all these bells ended up haunting the entire college. After she died, it was kind of an honor to be the bell ringer. Every single bell ringer has a story of seeing her on the stairs or having her whisper in their ear as they were walking up the stairs to ring the bells. The bells sometimes ring. The ringing is heard on campus, and yet there aren't any more bells installed, right? It's not there anymore, and yet people still hear the bells during certain times of the year. So it's this really great love story of these people who, even though they didn't even die at the same time, their ghosts are still walking the campus that they loved. They're still ringing the bells throughout this little part of Florida that meant so much to them. And we went there. We went there at night, right? I have this really great picture that we think we have of another ghost near the bell. It's always hard to tell visual evidence, like whether it's good or whether it's not. And people have said, I don't see anything. And other people have been like, oh my God, it looks like the brown friar. But we went to the campus that night. We went there at about 4:00 in the morning, and we have all these pictures. We were taking pictures. We had actually come from another famous legend trip that was nearby. And all of a sudden there was just quiet. Everything stopped. And we both kind of looked at the same area at the same time, and we saw essentially these two shadows walking from tree to tree in the area. It wasn't in the front of the campus, it was behind the campus. And we were just both, it was a profoundly quiet moment. And then all of a sudden they were gone, and it was, wow, like we just experienced something. We can go home and go to sleep now. And so many of our legend trips are like that. There's a moment where you realize the experience is happening, and then it's gone. And you were meant to experience it at that moment and only for that moment. And then you move on. So it's this really great love story that began with a crappy love story, which ended up being a really, really profound one.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, folks, we want to hear if you've had an interesting love ghost story. Email us, dave@darknessradio.com. That's dave@darknessradio.com. Or you can call our Voices from Beyond voicemail at 651-300-4977. That's 651-300-4977. Give us a call. Tell us your story. You have 3 minutes to leave a voicemail message. And if you're unable to fit it all in the 3 minutes, just hang up, call right back, continue your story. Or, like I said, email me, dave@darknessradio.com, and I will make sure to read it on an upcoming episode of Darkness Radio. Are you collecting more? As this book comes out, are you getting inundated with more ghostly love tales?
It's funny. It's because when I do like library presentations, I don't even touch the stories in the book. because since the book's been published, I have so many more stories that it's just like I can tell you haunted love stories for an hour without ever having to touch upon any of the ones in the book. So, you know, it's one of those things. The legends find their way to me. It's sometimes it's a random email. Sometimes it's just a line in a book. But, you know, I continue to look for them. So anyone who has ones, especially in Florida, I would love to hear about them because, you know, on my show, that's kind of what I do. Even though I host it by myself now. It's still this kind of exploration of these ghost stories. And at least half of them still have to do with some kind of love story playing itself out.
Well, you can't tease us with that. Give us one of your favorite stories that you didn't include.
Oh, wow. Probably the most interesting one that I continuously follow up on because I'm still trying to get it right and find the right location is the Amish Bridge of Sarasota. So we've thrown out the word Sarasota a few times. There actually are ghostly legends in Sarasota. And it is a classic Romeo and Juliet story. He's Amish. She loved his celery. I can only assume they meant the vegetable and there wasn't some kind of like, you know, sex joke thrown in there. And they used to meet at the Amish Bridge, right? And there was a kind of the separation between the Amish section of Sarasota and the English, as they call it, section. So if you know anything about it, it's the third largest population of Amish people in the country. It's where they go in the winter. And his father found out, and so he was delayed in getting to meet them. She was bored. She figured, like, what's going on here? She decided to pick some flowers, and she fell into the water. And when she fell into the water, she kind of hit the rocks, and she was bleeding a little bit. And so she took off her dress that was, you know, the bottom part of her dress that was covered in blood, and she decided to run home. It was very quick. Run home and change so she would still look beautiful when he got there. When he got to the bridge, he realized that there was a bloody, her bloody clothes were floating there, and an alligator was right nearby. You got to have an alligator because it's a Florida story, right? And so he assumed that this alligator had eaten her. So he climbed to the top of the bridge, threw himself off because he couldn't stand to live without her. She ended up getting back a few minutes later, saw him there, and jumped off the bridge and killed herself to be with him. And then the saddest part of the legend is that they're not together. When the ghosts are seen, his ghost is always on the Amish side of the water, and her ghost is always on the English side of the water, and they seem to be reaching towards each other, and they can never be with each other because there's this water and alligators that are kind of separating them for eternity.
Even in the ghost world, alligators are screwing with us?
You know, there are. So I know that you've heard plenty of like crybaby bridge legends,
right?
All throughout. Almost every crybaby bridge legend that takes place in Florida ends up when I go there being like, oh, that's not a crybaby, that's an alligator. Like that's what the people are hearing at night when they hear this thing. So yes, alligators definitely make and that's kind of the Florida appeal, right? So any of these stories could be found no matter where you live, but they have a Florida twist, and oftentimes that Florida twist is, and then there was an alligator. So.
And the crybaby, that's that little meeping sound that the alligators make, right? That makes it sound as though a child is crying out.
Exactly. And a lot of times it's just water over rocks, right? And because you're not seeing it, you're only hearing it, your mind starts to imagine things, especially because you've heard about crybaby bridges your whole life. In Florida, crybaby bridge is like that sound of running water is often the sound that an alligator makes. And the suicide that people hear, the splashing in the water of the people committing suicide in those same kind of bridges ends up being because that's where alligators jump in the water.
Crazy.
Or fun. It's ghosts.
Or it's ghosts. One or the other. It's definitely, we've limited it down to those possibilities.
Yes.
Very cool stuff, Chris. Thanks for sharing a little pre-Valentine's Day with us and giving us some insights. Haunted Florida love stories, ghostly tales from Florida. Chris Balzano, we have a link up for the book, and we have a link up for his website, Tripping on Legends. That's all on today's program, so you can find it easily. Our thoughts and prayers are with you, Chris, that Valentine's Day, I can send Tim, if it's easier, dressed in a diaper with his little baby angel wings and his Nerf crossbow to come hit you in the heart and see if he can re-stimulate love for you.
No, just the thought of that image and the one of you in the shower is enough to get me through Valentine's Day this year.
All right. Hey, anything we can do to help. That's my theory. Chris Balzano, thanks again, buddy. Take care. Be safe, and happy Valentine's Day to you and yours.
You too. Thank you very much for having me on, guys.
That's it for today, folks. We will be back. Remember, tomorrow, another episode of Holzer's Ghosts as we examine another case of season 1 from the first season of the show. We'll re-examine that. That's on tomorrow. And then we're back next week with all new True Crime Tuesday, Supernatural News, and more. That's Tim. I'm Dave. That was Chris. And this is Darkness Radio.